Clark again. Oh, through again he goes. He's got Tutu with him. It's Ioane, in fact. And Rico Ioane's going to...
Nice, thanks, Rich. Yeah, one thing I wanted to look at is that Pasifika Super Rugby bid. So I know Sir Brian Williams and a couple of the other guys, they put forward what I thought was a pretty solid bid to be part of Super Rugby Aotearoa next season. And on the back of that Kalanoa bid, which we've spoken about in this podcast as well, this bid has also fallen through. And I just wanted to get your guys' thoughts on, what do we make of that? What's the future of Pasifika Rugby, and what do we think went wrong? And just basically our general thoughts on that. So, Sally, mate, what did you make of this just failed bid for Pasifika and Super Rugby?
For me, I thought it was it felt like it's a bit rushed. Them putting through forward a team. If anything, just like how Argentina had to wait as well as Japan had to wait. What I mean by wait is actually put something forward and then actually go ahead and let it come into fruition. Whereas this was just a thought that's pretty much escalated because of COVID. Perfect timing because the scale of the tournament is shrunk, and then obviously everyone's looking for opportunity now to put a Pacific Island team forward. So not everyone has been successful on their bid come first time, especially within Super Rugby, because you wanted to limit the amount of teams per nation into the tournament. But now that obviously South Africa is gone on a full-time basis, I can see why a lot more people would have been disappointed that no Pacific Island team has been allowed to enter into the competition. But in saying that, now they've got another whole year to prepare. So I coming to the next time that they obviously come in front of Sansa, I don't want them to have any sort of excuses, because I can see what the excuses are from Sansa. At the end of the day, they want to generate enough revenue in order to accommodate all the players and their salaries, as well as the coaching and all the management, as well as accommodate all the funds that will go to fund the whole competition. There's not really much coming. There's not really much revenue that would be coming from the Pacific Islands team. I mean, even if they are based in NZ or whether they're based overseas, I don't see their facilities being up to standard compared to compared to most of the Super Rugby. There's counties, there's Northland, there's Southland, there's all these teams. Their facilities are probably not up to the Super Rugby's facilities, but they're far better than the teams that are based in the Pacific Islands. That's something that you've got to take into consideration. I'm not a believer in having a team that's representing the Pacific Islands based in South Auckland or based in Auckland. That does no justice for the actual cause of the team. I want it to be based in Fiji, because I feel like that's probably the more established country out of the Pacific nations and the more established in rugby at the moment. So, like I said, you can look at it as a glass half empty, but I look at it as an opportunity for us to use this whole year now to obviously put more funds into backing this campaign moving forward, as well as I'm pretty sure from Sansa's end, they want to see not just a 1 year plan, they want to see like a 5-10 year plan to ensure that this team is going to be successful and that there's going to be no emergency call for funds to help keep the club afloat. I think that's one thing that Sansa is probably that's one thing that they want to see moving forward, especially with the next bid come next year.
Yeah, nice, interesting thoughts there. I agree with a lot of what you said there. So, Roger, mate, what's your take on it?
Yeah, I'm not sure how long this bid was being formulated before they proposed it to the governing bodies, but I just feel like Sully touched on the whole being patient and the waiting game, but I believe that the Pacific have been shunned because they included the Japanese Super Rugby team before they even included a super team from the Pasifika. Brian Williams, who was a huge part of the proposal and the bid for Moana Pasifika, he's been trying to advocate for Pasifika inclusion since 1995, since way back when he was heavily involved with Manu Samoa as one of the coaches. So, I mean, and seeing an article where it said how disappointed he was because the way that NZR came back at them and saying that the Pasifika proposal didn't front up, but they believed that the way that they had gone through the processes that were advised to them to be able to put through a professional bid, they said that the bid that they put through was a completed report from an accounting firm, Deloitte, I think it was called. I'm not sure how to pronounce that name, and they seen a feasibility study that contained more than 100 pages of cost analysis, possible teams and coaching teams, all in that proposal, and yet that was the response that they got from the NZR, was that the Pasifika bid didn't front up. Whatever has happened since prior to that with any other proposals that have come from any possible Pasifika team, whether it be from the islands or a local-based team here in New Zealand, I'm not too sure how long their proposals were put together before they put it forward, but it just seemed this was the best chance for them, whether on the back of the Kanaloa bid didn't do them didn't do it any sort of justice in terms of that regard, and just seeing another Pasifika bid being rejected in the way that it was. But I think we're due that Pasifika inclusion, regardless of whether it's based in the islands. But like, I agree with you, Sally, that the stadia in the Pacific is not up to scratch. But if anyone is the closest to it, it would be Fiji and Suva. However, they were even proposing Mount Smart Stadium was going to be their base. I get that what you're saying in terms of it shouldn't be based here in New Zealand, but I believe if it's a Pasifika team, yep, you want it to be in the one of the nations in the Pacific. But I think the second best option would be for it to be in the most populated Polynesian city of the world, and that's in Auckland. And so, and there's a support base already, irrespective of whether they were to start next year or the year after in the Super Rugby comp. The revenue would come in because they've got a fan base already, and whether that means the current teams lose a lot of their support base because now the Pacific team has taken over, because we've got the most populated Pacific city in the world, it's almost automatic that that'll be a second team or a team that they support on top of their original super teams. But again, I don't know how the revenue works and making sure everything's feasible. But to me, it sounded like they did have a professional proposal to put forward. I feel disappointed that they've just been told that they didn't show up, despite the hard work that those people in the background, as well as the ones at the forefront of it all, would have put into it. So who knows what they need to do to make sure that they get that inclusion. Obviously not next year, but maybe the year after. But then there's talks now that Australia might include them in their Super Australia comp. So that will be to the detriment of the NZR. And if that goes ahead for next 2021, where this Moana Pasifika can then transition everything that they've tried to implement here into and be included with the Super Australia, what's that saying about the NZR not making it happen? Because if Australia can make it happen, then it's just going to be a sort of a black mark on New Zealand rugby. But again, I can understand they don't want a team that's just thrown together to be the team that the Saladwala will get the hidings. Then where was that sort of thought process when they included the Sunwolves? Because they were the team that were getting smashed every single time. Every time they included a new team for the South African franchises, the Kings in the past, the Cheetahs, they had to start from the bottom and get smashed. But they obviously have they can generate money and revenue through the population base. Japan again.
Yeah, I feel like it comes back to just the restructuring of the Super Rugby competition. Now that there's because obviously before they couldn't put another team, only based on the fact that if they were going to put a Pacific Island team, it would fall under the Super Rugby NZ conference, and we were already stacked with 5 teams. It wasn't until the restructuring where we separated ourselves from the other branches of South Africa and Australia that we can possibly look to include more teams in. That's what I mean. I know Brian Williams and his team have been trying very hard, but for me personally, like, you know, I feel like we are all hardcore rugby fans.
Yeah.
If it wasn't for Super Rugby Aotearoa, I would have never heard of any of this bidding whatsoever. You know, I've never heard of them coming out publicly with this outrage of like, why isn't there a Pacific Rugby team? You know, there's always been discussions, there's always been talks, but like, you know, like that, the New Zealand conference being full itself, that should have not stopped them from at least getting their voice out there, because then, you know, like, they were easily able to move the conferences around to accommodate Sunwolves, to accommodate the Jaguares, and that's something, I mean, that's why I mean, it feels like it's just one of those things, like just because they are successful now, they're complaining more about the problems that we already know about, like, you know, like how unfair and how it seems like it never seems to side with the Pacific Islanders, especially when it comes to you know, we've had these issues with the eligibility. You know, we've had so many good players play a couple of tests for the other countries, especially the tier 1 countries, and now they don't have that opportunity for want to represent their home countries. You know, it starts from there, it stems from there. So, like, you know, there's all these battles that you know that they've got all these loops that have all been that they've got to learn how to jump through, because like I said earlier, it's the first time that I'm hearing of all this background work that they're trying to get the specific team, but that's only based on, you know, since since Super Aotearoa started, and like, in all honesty, like, I give more props to the Kanaloa guys. You know, they've just come out and like they're literally started this year, and they're making noise by getting the right people on. You know, no disrespect to Sir Brian Williams, but he's been out of the game for you know, 30-40 plus years, and like, you know, as much as I love what he did with Samoa, I don't respect the job he's done with Samoa, because I feel like the same Samoa back then is the same Samoa we see now. You know, like, what I want to see is someone that bangs and makes that much noise. But, you know, yeah, sweet, if shit doesn't work well with this team, I want you to go back to the Pacific Islands and bloody grow our Samoan rugby, because how bloody fucking mediocre and average has our team been in the last couple of years. You know, I get this notion of trying to like incorporate more of our Pacific Islanders within the rugby system, especially abroad in our tier 1 nations, but like, we've got to grow it at home. You know, Fiji is doing it. Why can't Samoa? Why can't Tonga? Why can't every other Pacific nation? There is a recipe for success, but no one's bloody asking the proper questions, and no one's holding the people accountable that need to be held accountable in order for us to grow. And we all know as Samoans who those people are, and those, you know, the likes of Brian Williams should be the ones to bring those people to light. You know, like, if anything, I feel like that's probably another reason why Sansa's a bit standoffish. They don't want to get into disputes with people of political stature in those countries, and then make it outside of rugby, when, you know, make it a more political argument when it comes to the allocating of funds and stuff like that, rather than, you know, stuff that's to be strictly based on players and their rugby and their welfare, as well as the revenue that they can generate for themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I think that just brings to light, you know, one own proverb that my dad used to always recite is "Mo fa'alisa, mo fa'aleagalisa mo."
Yeah,
you know,
man.
and that's the thing is it's the power pool, eh? It's just, you know,
Yeah,
one
man.
person wants to be involved. So it's like even if this was to get off the ground, then who's going to be interested in coming abroad and coming on top on trying to have some sort of piece of the action? But
That's
if
what
they,
I mean, Rog, man. That's what I mean.
yeah,
As soon as something does go successful, I bet you there's gonna be more hands trying to get into the pot. And I think Wasanza, they need more than just a year of bidding. They need, they need something that you've worked on a whole year, not just 3 months, not just 6 months.
yeah,
They want to
yeah,
see 12 months of work that can ensure success across 5 to 10 years time. And that's
yeah,
something like, that's something as us Islanders know, like we can't even guarantee our own success with our own Pacific nation and their rugby teams across, across a window of between two World Cups. From
yeah,
2011 to 2015, I thought Samoa we were going to take the next step, man. And then look,
yeah,
if anything, we've regressed right back to where we were. And like, that's just me speaking as a proud Samoan, as I know you guys are as well. But that's just like with Tonga. Tonga had a great team in 2003, and then they've just seemed like they've just regressed every year. But they're on their way back up. Fiji, they were probably the one that were probably less developed in the 15s, more developed in the sevens, but they've used that same recipe within the sevens in terms of um, breeding their own players from the ground up. They've breeded the culture of working hard for your spots, working collectively, and it's just amazing to see the right people that have come from offshore to implement these systems, implement the rugby foundations. Even though they're not Fijian, but implement them into the Fijian culture of rugby society, and it's done really well for the 15s, and just there's all these great players. There's all these great players now that have gone overseas to France as well as to England, and what they're bringing back to Fiji rugby is just amazing as well.
that's true. I mean, you're right. All those unions, they struggle. The Fiji, the Tongas, the Samoa, and it's almost like if we like you even have to go back to our British Lion equivalent Pacific team. Hey,
Yeah,
such an awesome concept, yet we can't even be consistent and have that
no, we
going.
can't, man. And
And
to be
just
honest, that's what everyone else is basing on the potential. Imagine if that team had like a couple of months to work together. And even though we got pumped, but that was just because we were making do with the best players we had, and that's the potential that everyone's like trying to fuel these ideas or the bids that are going through for Pacific Island team. But as sad as it is to say, it's a white man's world out there when it comes to this kind of campaigning for, you've almost got to think of it from a financial and a capitalist side, because it's got to benefit. It's not about how it benefits you. Let's be honest. It's about how it benefits them and how it benefits everyone else.
yeah,
So that's why I mean. I hope that they don't take this as a massive slap in the face, or take it as offense, but rather take it as this is just a little setback for us, and then we've got another 12 to 24 months to work on something better.
because whatever the indicator that they've said they didn't front up, whatever that means, however we unpackage that, if they've been told, okay, here's a checklist that you need to go back and come back to us within a year's time or by the end of next year in order to put in another proposal for 2022, then hopefully they've got that, everyone's on the same page, make sure those are ticked off, and then Bob's your uncle hopefully. But until that, but then like you say, a Pasifika team brings in all the notions of how a Pacific community works, and it's a lot of people want to get a piece of the pie. And so hopefully they've got the right people in place, just like with the Kanaloa one, get the right people in place and those bids will be successful. And I think it might be a waiting game that's just been tested with. If you're really serious about these bids, you're going to persist with it, and then hopefully come 2022 it'll be fruits of their labour. Malo Joey!
Nice. Welcome, Joey, brother. Welcome on, bro. I'll let
Talofa.
Joey, are you calling in from the moon?
From yes.
Joey Armstrong.
Joey Armstrong.
Because of where I'm from, the city of the future, I thought I'd take it even further and let you guys know where the...
You're in One Tree Hill. That's the observatory there, isn't it? I thought it was.
Yes,
I thought it would be closed by now, Joey.
Oh, I'm part of the security here.
Joey, only bad things happen at this time upon One Tree Hill.
That's what I'm here to protect everyone from.
Why are you holding an axe? Was it a chainsaw? It's already gone, Sully. It's already gone.
It's a White Matter jersey.
Oh! Wow!
It's for protection. It's for protection.
Gotta get protection out that way.
That's a nice phone, by the way, you got there, young Roger.
Kia ora. What? Sorry, come again.
You got the fade and the party at the back going on there?
Oh, yeah. The barber, he keeps on leaving the back. I don't know what's going on. He say, my $20 only gives me the two sides, and that's it.
The styles of this man. Gonna have to start calling you Joe Royal soon.
No. Joe Royal's his own man. No,
Guys,
good.
boys, there's some really good thoughts, some good insight there, Sally, on the Pasifika bid. But yeah, maybe when they get their hierarchy of who they want to put in charge, maybe the Sansa, whoever it is, powers that be, could put those people through anti-corruption tests to make sure that they're not going to try and rip everyone off. But you know, I suppose where I was looking at it, and I'll get your thoughts on this as well, Joey, is if it's not going to happen now, when is it ever going to happen? Because they're playing a tournament with only 5 teams. That only leaves 2 games a week. There's opportunities there to get additional teams in there. And the Pasifika team is a good team to get in there due to the proximity and everything. And then they can at least have 3 games a week, get a bit more broadcast money and all the rest of it. And Rog, you brought up that Deloitte report, and they said that they were they were at least break even financially. And when you consider that the New Zealand Rugby Union, I think they're due to lose $100 million this year due to COVID and a whole lot of other stuff. So for them to then say to the Pasifika bid that you need to be financially viable from day one, I just think that was completely unrealistic. And the Deloitte, and it's
unrealistic, unrealistic and unfair because
But I thought that Deloitte report where they said that they could at least break even in year 1, that's a good outcome. That is a good outcome. And that report, that 100-page report, said that they were financially viable, which has always been the reason, or the supposed reason, why they don't put the Pasifika teams in there, is the finances. So I thought, if it's not going to happen now, I suppose when is the due time, and that's sort of where I was left disappointed. But good points there. I agree with a lot of what you said, Sally, about improving it for the betterment of all of Pacific rugby and for the future as well. We can't just keep languishing in the doldrums and being in the same spot. Get this bit underway, and still 5 years, 10 years from now, we're in the exact same rut that we've been in for the past, basically since professionalism started. But Joey, mate, we were just talking about the failed Pasifika bid, mate. What did you make of anything in that side of things with your good old friend Super G Williams?
Mate, it was quite an unfortunate result, wasn't it? I mean, those poor buggers. But I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised by the outcome. I'm not surprised by anything that NZ Rugby came back with. They've been telling us the same rhetoric for the last 20 years. And for us to be surprised now, we shouldn't give them that kind of satisfaction. I think we do need to ask ourselves a few questions in terms of the negotiation team. I think my first initial questions are always who stood to lose the most and who stood to gain the most in these negotiations that happened.
Salesperson coming in here, the sales pitch.
Oh, totally, mate. Totally. I was
bringing the sales reps.
I was pissed at the outcome because it just spoke to me of people not doing their homework, and not necessarily their homework on the particular or the typical outcome that came in the end, but more the outcome on the homework on the people that were involved. Like, sure, the people that are involved were a part of the NZ Rugby organisation and legal teams and what have you, whoever was involved. They should have done their homework on every single individual and then formulated a plan where they catered to every single individual's needs, not just the organisation's needs, not just ticking the boxes that they needed to tick off by being financially viable and you know, having some cash reserves to please the powers that be, but every individual will come in there with their own agenda. And what it sounded like or seems like is that whoever the negotiating team on the Pasifika side of things went in there and painted them with the same brush instead of catering to every individual's needs. And that's just me looking from the outside in as a sales guy with my sales eyes. I was deeply disappointed because surely they would have learned from the outcome of Kanaloa with the MLR competition and how they didn't get in there and what the reasons were there. It seems like the same reasons happened here with this one. Financial. Or that's what NZ Rugby are saying. They weren't financially ready and to throw them in and get their asses kicked in the first competition was the biggest cop-out. It might have been somewhat accurate, but biggest cop-out. It was a bloody cop-out. It was just there to accommodate or supplement their answer which being, no, we don't want you guys in this competition because we feel threatened by you and your existence, and we don't actually want a globalized game, even though we spout that out in every opportunity we get on TV or in the media. So that's my take. Sorry, that was a bit long.
Yep. No, it's interesting you talk about who has the most to lose, because if they've run it out of Mount Smart, then who I think has the most to lose would have been the Blues, because a lot of us locals are close enough to Mount Smart that we could jump the fence and start supporting another team. And if you consider that the Blues are the franchise of the most populous area of New Zealand, then they could potentially lose a lot of fans, and that wouldn't sit well with the powers that be in New Zealand Rugby Union. And it's interesting, I read this article from Gregor Paul where he talked about, basically the New Zealand Rugby Union is scared, like you mentioned, because if they get this thing off the ground, the All Blacks have always had the pick of those sort of guys like Sivi Vatu and Vaifafita, guys who have come over with dual nationality, and they always end up picking the All Blacks. The All Blacks always get to pick who they want. But if the Pasifika bit gets off the ground, and then there's that second option, and it's a really viable option, they might find that they're losing more players, because 40% of all Super Rugby players in New Zealand identify as Pasifika, so there's a genuine threat there if they can get it to work and they can get their act together. So, a lot going on behind the scenes.
I don't think it would be a team that would be exclusive to Pasifika. I think it would be just, whoever they would be able to pick, if they were able to get anyone that's of European descent or even overseas, because I think a lot of their player base were going to be not only the ones that are fringe players here or Mitre 10 Cup players that were excluded from Super contracts, but then it was the international players that were playing abroad as well that they were looking to sort of bring in. I mean, that would have been on a sort of I'm just on a hunch here, that's probably where they would get the majority of their professional players, and then hopefully bring in some of the fringe players here in the New Zealand system. But you're right, I mean, it would have encroached on the player pools that each of the franchises have here, the draft pool as well as the Blues majority pool. But you think of it, if the Blues have already got who they want, the other franchises have got who they want as well, and then they pick from the draft. I think Moana Pasifika, we're going to choose predominantly from those that were remaining outside of those pools. But you're right, because in terms of contractual agreements, they probably are encroaching on, players that are eligible for super contracts in the Aotearoa franchise, so to speak. But
yeah, but the fans and everyone, the ticket sales and all the rest of it. Like, I would have been a
That,
lot
that
of
would have taken care of
Aucklanders
itself. Yeah.
will go and
Yeah.
support this team as opposed to supporting the Blues if they got on the ground. And that's taking money out of the Blues and New Zealand Rugby Union's pocket. So
Yeah.
No,
With what Joey said, I think of it the other way in the sense like who's got the most to gain and who's got the most to lose would both have to be NZRU. In the sense like, yeah, obviously they could gain more revenue, especially if it is a local based team. At the end of the day, all this revenue, it funnels back towards the NZRU, even though it goes through the channels of the Pacific team first. But then at the same time, you're taking on this massive risk, which you're already in a liability to from this year's competition. And if you take this bid and add this team in as of next year, that's 6 mouths you've got to feed when you could barely feed 5.
Mm.
You know, and like I don't see it in that way of in a sense like, yeah, it is an issue we've encountered for numerous amount of years in terms of the NZRU being so-called afraid of us Pacific Islanders being able to develop our game so that, you know, but at the same sense as well, it's like I feel like I'm looking on the other side of the spectrum in the sense there's so many people that we know that deserve bloody Super Rugby contracts but never get the opportunity because each franchise is full and then they have to look elsewhere abroad. You know, I'm looking at it, man. If this team can help us keep more quality players in NZ to be playing for this Super Rugby team, and that, you know, at the end, and it not only makes the competition better, but it gives the Pacific Island teams a better quality of players that they can select for their team. And for me, I'm looking at it in a way to breed the game in a better sense. Most it feels like most of the international rugby calendar for Southern Hemisphere teams, which the Pacific Island teams fall under, it seems like it almost revolves around the big three, which is Australia, South Africa, and New Zealand. If we can get a better pool selection of players from this team and from any other team that hopefully we can get into the competition, I reckon it'll probably be better for our team moving forward. But no, I definitely understand where you guys are coming from as well. Yeah, I don't know what. For me, I feel like that their fear factor. You got to look at it from the players' standpoint as well, in the sense, you know, the All Blacks are giving you this better life. You know, I'm giving you all these sponsors. I'm giving you money to pay for footy. I'm giving you, you know, all these accomplishments as well as these endorsements that come with putting on the black jersey. What can our home nations give them? And that's where the real, it should never be as much shit as the All Blacks and the NZRU cop for taking our players. We've got to look at it the other way from the player standpoint. Like, you know, as much as I am loyal and diehard Samoan, I'm not going to tell a person to go, hey, go play for Samoa, represent your family and your country, but then at the same time, you know, tell you to turn away that 100, 200 grand, you know, contract, you know, on a yearly basis to provide and to look after your family and to ensure ensure some sort of generational wealth for you and your family moving along down the line. So it's a bit of a tricky situation, that one, because and it all stems from the initial argument I was saying that we've got to fix stuff at home. We've got to make sure that if a player does choose to switch allegiance, make sure things are ready to help cater for, you know, make sure they're looked after as well.
yeah, I think in some ways that's sort of a chicken and the egg scenario. So if I look at Argentina, right, they didn't have any competition to play for. They sorted out stuff on the field. They had some really good performances in the World Cups. They made a couple of semi-finals and a quarter-final and all the rest of it, to the point where the IRB or the World Rugby or whoever they are, they had to find a spot for them, and that's how they came in with us in the start of the Four Nations or whatever they called it. Then Japan, they did something very similar. They had very good performances in the World Cup where they made some playoffs. They had a good World Cup previous, and then the IRB stepped in again and said, hey, look, we've got to find a spot for these guys. So I feel like the Polynesian teams have to go that similar route. If they want to get a seat at the top table, they need to start by getting good performances on the field. And how do they get those good performances on the field? They need to have better pathways and better development systems. So that's where I think this Pasifika bid will help to funnel better quality players through to the national team and, just expose them to higher levels of competition. And then when they improve that, then you improve the national side. And if by some miracle Samoa was to make a couple of quarterfinals or something at the World Cup, the IRB will have to step up and say, hey, look, we've got to find a spot for them somewhere. And then that's when you get your foot in the door and get a seat at the top table, that's where you can get some more money. Both Japan and Argentina, and that they've made financially, they're a lot better off just through being part of these tier 1 competitions. So, yeah, that's what I mean about the chicken and egg scenario. If you can get the development systems flowing, then you can improve the player quality to get a seat at the top table through the IRB. And that's why I wanted this Pasifika bid, I felt, was a big part of that that drive forward. But this is turning into a whole podcast on its own, this thing, Pasifika bid, because I know the boys are all passionate about our Polynesian rugby, boys. But yeah, have you guys got anything else you wanted to add there, Joey or Rog?
No, good points from Sully and Rog. No, good.
Yeah, no, it can be a frustrating sort of conversation as well, but valid points from everyone. But just keep on thinking about how Argentina improved because of their inclusion in the Rugby Championship.
Yeah.
But then that was on the back of having the Jaguares involved as well. So, like you said, a lot of their players were playing abroad because they didn't have a professional domestic competition. There was only an amateur competition back in Argentina. So once they had the Jaguares, their players didn't have to therefore go abroad, and then that just sort of the better they got, they ended up making a grand final. That was their player base was strengthened because of it, because they weren't just pulling players from all over the world to come into camp for international test season, and they were already playing together through the Jaguares. So, and it's different with the Sunwolves because they didn't really add. I think a lot of the revolution in Japan was a lot to do with how they strengthened their infrastructures domestically, and the inclusion of Tony Brown and what's his name?
Jamie
Joseph. Yeah, so they enhanced that rugby off the back of Eddie Jones from the previous World Cup campaign. So yeah, we were still hanging on to the darlings of the 91, 95, 91 and 95, making the quarterfinals from Samoa. Fiji are the only Pacific team to make a semi-final, and then we've got Tonga that are sort of there and thereabouts as well. So yeah, inconsistent.
Yeah.
It's interesting, Rog, like you brought up, that's when Samoa is probably their best ever performance at 91 World Cup. And next year will be the 30th anniversary. And I booked us in for a podcast. What's gone wrong in 30 years? Because that should have been a turning point. And we'll probably bring up a lot of the stuff again. But I'm really happy with the passion that you guys have for, obviously, Polynesian and Samoan and just Pacific rugby in general. So that's really come through in this last segment. But we've got to move on. And Rog, I'll get you to talk about this